Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today's Tuesday, July 15th, day 648 of the war. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our two political correspondents, Tal Schneider and Sam Sokol. Thank you both for joining me today.
Hi, Amanda.
Morning.
Yesterday, there was a lot of talk among the chattering classes about the end of democracy and indeed the constellation of pretty major events made for a lively day, to say the least. So we're going to focus on domestic politics in today's daily briefing. Sam and Tal will discuss the state of the coalition after the departure of United Torah Judaism and the failed motion to expel Arab MK Iman Ode. We'll delve into what's happening or not with the bill pushing for universal conscription. And we'll hear about part one of the hearing to dismiss the Attorney General. All of this and more when we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our two political correspondents, Tal Schneider and Sam Sokol. First, some headlines. 3 Israeli troops were killed and an officer was wounded when the tank they were in was hit by a blast in the northern Gaza Strip yesterday. Investigators were trying to piece together what caused the deadly blast, which came amid ongoing fighting with the Hamas terror group in the north of the enclave, but may have been the result of an operational error. The 3 fatalities were named as Staff Sergeant Shoham Menachem, 21, from Yardena, Sergeant Shlomo Yakir Shrem, 20, from Efrat, and Sergeant Yuli Factor, 19, from Rishon LeZion. The Israeli Air Force has launched a wave of strikes against Hezbollah targets in Lebanon's eastern Bekaa Valley. The IDF said the targets include military facilities belonging to Hezbollah's elite Radwan force, where operatives and weapon depots were detected. And a drone launched from Yemen at Israel was successfully intercepted by air defenses off of Israel's southernmost city of Eilat a short while ago. Let's turn to politics and start by setting the scene at the Knesset yesterday. So, Sam, I imagine the tension ramped up throughout the day, and I suppose the crescendo was leading to the plenum vote on whether or not to expel MK Iman Ode. But tell us what you saw from the morning through the late night that you were there.
Well, to start with, during the course of the day, there was a lot of coming and going, especially by the United Torah Judaism Party's faction meeting room in the Knesset. You had lawmakers meeting throughout the afternoon, discussing what they were going to do, how they were going to handle things, people coming in and out, journalists hanging out outside, trying to ambush whatever party officials or MKs were in the hallway to get any tidbit of information. And as the day progressed, you started to have, towards the evening, contacts between the ultra-Orthodox MKs and Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee Chairman Yuli Edelstein. Prime Minister Netanyahu came back from his trial in Tel Aviv, specifically in order to pressure Edelstein to speak to the Haredi and to present his long-delayed ultra-Orthodox enlistment bill. So in parallel with what was happening with the Haredim, you had the vote in the Knesset plenum on expelling Hadash-Ta'al chairman Iman Ode from the Knesset. And during the course of the afternoon and evening's plenum session, things got more and more heated. Multiple Arab lawmakers were heckled and yelled at by coalition lawmakers. People tossed back and forth accusations of being terror supporters. Multiple MKs were dragged out of the plenum, for yelling or interrupting or insulting. It was something of a madhouse.
Okay, that is not surprising at the Knesset, not the first time, not the last time. Now, Tal, eventually United Torah Judaism did leave the coalition in a pretty dramatic exit, and the Knesset committees headed by the party's lawmakers already canceled their hearings for today. We're hearing that members of the ruling Likud party are already reportedly squabbling over the jobs vacated by the exit of UTJ. But what does UTJ's exit mean for the stability of the coalition?
Right, Amanda, it's a big question. Obviously, it's less stable. And we hear this morning from Shas, that's the other ultra-Orthodox party that is part of the coalition, that they are considering their steps as well. They have 11 members, which means that if they will step out as well, the coalition will go down to 50. It's between 50 to 50 now because we are not completely sure about the status of Avi Maoz. Also, it's like a one-person faction, and we're not sure what he will do. But between 50 and 51, that's a low number. It's a very, very narrow government. Netanyahu as a prime minister may be able to continue in a manner of a narrow government for a couple of weeks or months. We are not sure, mainly because the way he was going around with previous instances when people left, he was keeping the jobs for them. For example, if the housing minister left his job, he's from United Torah Judaism, Netanyahu made sure that the person who replaces him doesn't really take over the ministerial job and lets Goldknopf, that's the name of the minister, to kind of be behind, the scenes, still making an impact. So I'm not completely sure what will take place because we do think maybe this is a little bit of a sham. They do like an act of leaving the government because they're very unhappy and they got orders from the rabbis, but they may still be behind the scene. And obviously the Knesset is out for recess, so there is not much. They will be out in recess at the end of July within 10 days. So there's not much going on as per legislation up until like October after the high holidays. So Netanyahu was granted a way to drag things on for a little while. I think he knows that this government will not, probably will not stick all the way to October 26th. But for now, they're keeping it somewhat together for a couple of more months, with the ultra-Orthodox being able to tell their voters and their people, we had to go. It was enough for us. So the entire, Haredi media is saying the rabbi said we have to go. We are out. We are not in that, government anymore. But for real, it's not such a big political event, at least for now.
I have just a question about one thing that you said, Tal, and that is that you said at 50 or 51 seats in the coalition, it's a narrow government, but it won't fall on this. And just to remind our listeners, there are 120 seats in the Knesset. I just don't understand why this is still considered a majority. How is this still a coalition when it's so far under, 60? You would expect that government would need to have a majority, even if it's 61. But you're talking about a government with 50 or 51. How does that work out?
It might not work, depending really on Shas, on Aryeh Deri. It might not work, but Netanyahu is really a master of politics. He was able to pull things together even in dire times. So we do expect him to be, again, masterful in with respect to how to deal with those situations. We all know that he called on Gafni, that's one of the head of United Torah Judaism, days before the attack on Iran. And, Gafni was about to step out at that day, and Netanyahu called him up and said, listen, sign this non-disclosure paper, and then I'll tell you what's going on. And Gafni signed it, and then Netanyahu told him within 4 days, we will have a major attack on Iran. This was actually revealed in the New York Times story. So you can count on Netanyahu. I mean, obviously the attack on Iran was important by itself, but he also uses situations like that, security situations. He also uses them for other goals. And it's important to say that the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox, did not step out and did not do any political stunt with respect to the hostages deal. They've been saying all along since the beginning of the war that they want to see the hostages out, and it's a very important security step for the government, but they never took action. They stayed in. So, I mean, would you expect Netanyahu to come up and say, listen, I have hostages deal on the table, which we all know he has, and convince them to do something politically? He may do so. I mean, I will not be surprised, Amanda. This is just assumptions. We don't have any facts on that. I'm just saying this is something that happens in Israel day and night.
Okay, and the main point of contention, of course, for United Torah Judaism is the conscription bill, which, as we understand it, Yuli Edelstein, who's the head of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, has written. And what's the status? He gave it to the Haredi, to the ultra-Orthodox party, Sam, and they rejected it. What's going on here?
So that is essentially what happened. Before I get into the details on that, I should say regarding Shas, I spoke this morning with Mati Bobchek, who's one of the main power brokers behind United Torah Judaism, and take it for what it's worth, but he is absolutely convinced that Shas will quit within the coming days. But even if they do that, again, as Tal said, we're going into the recess, and this buys Netanyahu time. He can have a minority government, and it buys him almost 3 months. Regarding the legislation itself, Edelstein, prior to the attack on Iran, was forced into a compromise with the ultra-Orthodox. Basically, they were trying to topple the government, even though Derry and Gafni knew ahead of time that the Iran attack was going forward. They continued to go through the public motions threatening to bring down the government. And Edelstein was basically forced into compromising on some of his principles in the enlistment bill relating to sanctions on draft dodgers. Now, when I was speaking to Bobchik this morning, he said that some of the sticking points yesterday when they were finally presented with this bill after a long delay was that it included not only sanctions on individual draft dodgers, but institutional sanctions on yeshivas, that it didn't reset the enlistment process to the beginning for tens of thousands of Haredim who have already received call-up orders since last summer. And he repeated what we've been hearing from all of the Haredim since yesterday, which is basically Edelstein went back on his word. So the Haredim were willing to accept in extremis certain concessions, but they feel that Edelstein went too far. That's their line. That's what they're saying. And at this point, they feel with increased enforcement against draft dodgers being expected coming from the army, and very little leverage left in terms of getting the legislation in the way they want it, that there's not much point to remaining in the coalition. I don't think they're getting any political credit with their voters, and they're not accomplishing what they want to accomplish.
Okay, Tal, we're hearing rumors this morning that Netanyahu is going to fire Edelstein from the Foreign Affairs Defense Committee and take on the job of the conscription bill himself. Netanyahu has a history, of course, of taking on different roles, or at least putting them into the prime minister's office. So what do you think the chances are that this could play out?
So, by the way, he was highly engaged last night, going into Edelstein office, taking the draft and fixing it with, his own pen, sitting on really the papers. This is also highly, not a regular sin to see the prime minister sits on the bills and corrects them. We've been hearing about his intention to dismiss Edelstein, I think, for more than a year now. Every time there is a crisis, someone says, oh, the prime minister is considering that. So because it never happened, up until now, I was thinking this is only, a way to negotiate, sending some reporters the announcement that he's considering that in order to get Edelstein in line. Maybe it will happen, maybe no. I'm having a hard time predicting, Amanda, if that is something that will keep the Haredi happy, because I think it's not the case. They have a real problem. The real problem is that the ultra-Orthodox do not want to join the military. That is the problem. And firing this person or that person, Netanyahu fired the defense minister over that draft bill. And did it help? I mean, we are almost a year since the firing of Yoav Gallant back at, I think it was October. And the reason for that was in order to get a draft bill, get the ultra-Orthodox satisfied with the suggested draft bill, and it never happened. So I would say if my gut feeling is that he's not going to get fired because the problem is real, and you have other people inside the Likud, members of the Knesset, who are unwilling to support this complete exemption that the ultra-Orthodox are looking for. So even if he replaces him, there's huge public pressure. There's like demonstrations, and there's a lot of organizations from reservists and people who are, serving in this war are unwilling to accept those compromises. It's a real political problem.
Just to add to what Tal said, if you read ultra-Orthodox media, the Haredim are not necessarily demanding Edelstein's ouster as well. They don't particularly feel that it'll accomplish anything in terms of getting them where they want to go.
Okay, we're going to go to a short break and then discuss the attempted dismissal of Iman Ode and the Attorney General. And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our political correspondents Tal Schneider and Sam Sokol. So a motion to expel Hadash-Tal chairman Iman Ode from the Knesset failed to pass yesterday, with only 73 out of the required 90 lawmakers voting in favor. 15 MKs voted against the motion, while multiple opposition parliamentarians boycotted the vote. So Tal, just remind me, who put forth the petition to oust Ode? Who is it who is trying to get him out? And Ode, we just need to remind our listeners, is retiring from politics with the next elections. So Tal, tell us about it.
Yes, it was put forward by the Likud members. It's not the first time that they're putting forward a request like that. It's a fairly new bill, a fairly new law that was enacted a couple of years ago, but was not used that much. I think Sam reminded me yesterday it was used only once before on another politician from the same party, Hadash. It's a joint Jewish-Arab party, very lefty and very socialist. And the hurdles in that law are very strong. So in order to send someone home, dismiss him after he was elected by the people, you have to come up with a majority of 90 out of 120. It's a very tough bar to get through. It needs to be a very severe act of all words that this MK said. Now, Iman Ode obviously has been on the sidelines, and he was saying severe things. But the Likud party, when they chose the specific words, the specific tweet that Ode used, they chose something very, I would say, not the harshest that he had. And people thought, why would they pick up a line like that? That was not the toughest or the worst thing he said. And the reasoning was, this is a political act. It's not a real thing. Now, they did not get the majority, by the way, because Yesh Atid, which is the biggest opposition party, did not show up to the event. They decided not to show up because they saw the ultra-Orthodox not playing along. So once the ultra-Orthodox, headed by Gafni and Goldknopf, said they're not voting for their own political reasons, Yesh Atid abstained, plus Benny Gantz's party, which is like a more little to the right, they also abstained, and the process failed.
Okay, Sam, you were there yesterday in this plenum vote, and what was the atmosphere after the vote failed? Was there any kind of sense of surprise, or was it just known ahead of time because of all of the constellation of things that Tal just said?
No, it was a sense of jubilation on the side of the Arab lawmakers. Obviously, members of the coalition were enraged by what happened. Yesterday was a political circus, honestly. As I said earlier, there was a lot of yelling, a lot of insults, people being dragged out of the plenum. Look, the case that they had against Ode was very weak. In order to expel a colleague from the Knesset, you have to be able to show that they express support for an armed struggle against the state of Israel. That's sort of the benchmark legally. And the Knesset legal advisor had previously stated that they had not met that. There were statements that Ode had made which could conceivably be interpreted in that way. Certainly people in the coalition interpret it that way. But the statement that he had specifically made that they chose to base their case on was when he said he was happy for the release of the hostages and prisoners when Israeli Palestinian security prisoners were released in exchange for Israeli hostages in Gaza this January. Now, this was certainly something that offended many Israelis across the spectrum, left, center, and right, but it was not something that necessarily was an endorsement of armed struggle.
So another dismissal that is in process is, of course, for Attorney General Gali Baharav Miara, who was not present as a controversial ministerial panel was convened at the Prime Minister's office in Jerusalem yesterday afternoon. In a letter ahead of the hearing, Baharav Miara warned that the proceedings paved the way for the government to remove her and any future Attorney General on the basis of, quote, irrelevant and corrupt considerations. She wrote, "It's a sham hearing with a predetermined outcome. It signifies heavy damage to the rule of law and Israeli democracy." So following her failure to attend, the committee decided to hold a second hearing on Thursday, to which she will be summoned, but it's not clear at all whether she will attend. Tal, there is a procedure in place for dismissing the Attorney General, and I believe it's 4 other specific roles that need a specific procedure to happen. So why is this hearing a sham? Meaning there is a procedure in place. Is this the procedure? What makes it a sham?
Right. So as our listeners may know, we have obviously as a democracy a separation of power. And we do not have a constitution. Many of the procedures are just decided by the Israeli government. For example, the procedure on how to remove an attorney general was decided by a government decision in 2004. And this was the procedure since then. This specific government has been in a conflict with the attorney general since the government was sworn in, even before the war. Obviously, the main reason for that was their legislative agenda to change Israel's judicial branch of power. They were trying to probably erase it or change it forever. And she's been very blunt about it, saying you cannot change the core governing principles of a democracy. But in security and in since the war began, she was on board with many things. She was very, very helpful to the government, securing many decisions with respect to the security issues of the country. And we have President Herzog, for example, praising her yesterday, saying how she was she had an important role in helping the country through the war. Yet this government specifically did not want to go through the procedure that was, decided back in 2004. The reason they didn't want to go through that procedure was because they were unable to set the required panel. The required panel at the time, you had to go find a former justice minister or a former attorney general that will sit on a panel to dismiss her. But none of the living former justice ministers or the former attorney generals were willing to sit in that panel, which tells you a lot about the problematic. So instead of still trying to do that in that process, they just bypass it by setting up a new ministerial committee. Now, all of the ministers that were chosen to sit in this ministerial committee already said in advance that they want to fire her. So the outcome is completely known. Plus, the title of this committee was the Committee to Dismiss the Attorney General. So it wasn't even a hearing. It just was, and she called it a sham. She said, you come up with your own rules as you go. It's everybody think it will not be able to stand up to principles of a democracy if it will go to the high court. And again, I'm stressing here for our listeners that we don't have a constitution. So there is no protections on Israel citizens for free speech, for if you want to be protected from police brutality, if you want to be protected with your immigration rights and so on, and your movement of freedom. And she has been, since she took office, she has been the great protector of those rights, standing up to the government and saying, for some things you cannot do that because we need to protect the citizen as well as, you have to govern, but you also have to protect citizens' rights. And so this is the main issue here at stake. And obviously the committee thought that, she didn't appear. We'll give her another chance to come up on Thursday, because obviously they want to send out a decision with explanations, because they know this decision will go up to the high court. So they're trying to do okay, we gave her a second chance to appear. She said she will not show up. And she said it in writing. She was not shying away from, making her opinion about what she was thinking about this committee. But I have to tell you also, Amanda, we heard yesterday the former Attorney General, the person who was in the same job just before her. And he said in a very, important interview, his name is obviously Avichai Mendelblit. He was the Attorney General just before Gali Baharav Miara. And he was given an interview yesterday and saying, the process that we're seeing is heading in the direction for the end of democracy. So that was, a big announcement coming from him. I think that scared people to hear him say it.
Tal, Sam, so much more to discuss. I really appreciate all of the nuance that you've brought to us today.
Thank you, Amanda.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. If you have any questions or comments, please send us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.